April 1945 settles like cold rain over a muddy Allied holding camp in western Germany. Hundreds of German women stand in crooked lines, clutching creased papers, eyes hollow after weeks of retreat and air raids. Some still wear faded military jackets, others only thin civilian coats pulled over rumpled uniforms. They expected food, shelter, and a swift journey home. Instead, iron gates swing shut behind them, and the sound echoes. In that moment, they become prisoners of war. No one can tell them how long they will remain, where they will be sent, or even whether their names have been properly recorded. For these women, surrender did not end the war, it merely transformed it. How did they arrive here? Flashback to pre-war Germany, where most of these women were not frontline soldiers. They worked as telephone operators, radar clerks, air defense assistants, typists, and nurses, skills learned in offices, shops, and classrooms before the bombs fell. Many enlisted to escape factory shifts or the terror of nightly raids, trading danger for steady rations, warm beds, and a sense of purpose. The uniform offered structure in a collapsing world, and few questioned where it might lead. They never imagined it could mark them for captivity. In their minds, prisoner camps were places for men with rifles, not women who relayed messages or fed shells into anti-aircraft guns. That fragile assumption was about to shatter under the weight. When Germany collapsed in 1945, Allied armies swept forward and captured millions of people in a matter of weeks. Men and women, civilians and soldiers, refugees and uniformed auxiliaries were herded together in a vast human tide that no planning document had ever anticipated. Female German auxiliaries were suddenly reclassified as military personnel, which placed them under prisoner of war regulations almost by accident. The camps meant to hold them, however, had been built for male combat troops, not young women with clerical hands and medical training. Beds were scarce, clothing was improvised, and medical care was stretched thin. Paperwork vanished in the confusion, leaving identities blurred. Some officers questioned their detention, yet none would authorize release, so the women remained. Germany in 1945 was a landscape of ruins, where entire city blocks lay flattened, and rail lines twisted like broken wire. Millions of civilians wandered the roads with whatever they could carry, searching for homes that no longer existed. Into this devastation, the Allied army suddenly inherited more than 7 million German prisoners, among them a vast and unexpected population of women. Supplying this human sea with food, transport, and shelter strained even the world's most powerful militaries. Trains were scarce, warehouses were empty, and winters still lingered in the air. In this overwhelming crisis, female prisoners slipped from view, becoming numbers rather than names. Their futures were not being planned, only delayed as they waited behind wire. The women were scattered across a patchwork of prison camps that stretched from shattered German towns to quiet French countryside, and even across the Channel into Britain. Each morning began with roll call, their names read out against damp clipboards, followed by labor assignments that filled the long hours. Some cleared bricks from bombed streets, others worked in fields, laundries, or on rough road crews, their hands blistered and raw. This work was not designed as punishment, but as a desperate exchange, because the Allies needed labor to rebuild, and the women needed food to survive. Yet their prisoner of war status locked them inside the system. They received no wages, no travel documents, and no clear release dates. Letters home were rare and slow. In this strange half-world, they were neither treated as enemies nor granted freedom, suspended between a past that had collapsed and a future that no one could yet promise. For many women, the shock came when weeks turned into months. They had expected to be released after surrender, a simple journey back to families and ruined homes. Instead, their names remained on lists, stamped and filed by distant offices. The same uniforms that once promised rations and safety now bound them to barbed wire. Each morning they lined up, waiting for orders that never included freedom. Slowly, a frightening truth settled in. The war was over, but captivity was not. They were trapped in paperwork, shortages, and forgotten procedures, wondering who would remember they existed beyond the camp gates. As weeks stretched into seasons, morale in the camps eroded like the muddy paths beneath their boots. Some women grew sick from poor nutrition and cold barracks, while others lost all contact with families scattered across a broken country. Transfers came without warning, pushing them onto trucks or trains headed for unfamiliar camps, severing fragile friendships overnight. Yet in this instability, something quietly resilient took root. The women formed small circles of trust, sharing scraps of bread, trading stories, and even teaching one another bits of French or English to ease daily life. Nurses tended to the weak with improvised bandages, and clerks kept track of names when officials did not. They survived not because the system protected them, but because they protected one another, proving that solidarity could endure even behind wire. By the end of 1945, hundreds of thousands of German women were still held in camps across Allied Europe, long after the guns had fallen silent. Official reports showed some remained behind wire well into 1947, waiting as political decisions moved slowly through distant offices. For women who had never imagined becoming prisoners at all, this prolonged detention was a staggering twist of fate. What they thought would be days had become years, turning temporary surrender into an extended chapter of captivity that few outside the camps truly understood. Eventually, pressure began to build beyond the barbed wire. Humanitarian groups and the Red Cross urged Allied governments to review the status of female prisoners, and slow-moving repatriation programs finally took shape. Lists were revised, transport was arranged, and one by one the camps began to empty. The women stepped onto trains bound for shattered cities and uncertain reunions, often returning to homes reduced to rubble and families that had scattered or disappeared. Freedom did not bring easy answers, but it did restore choice. After years of waiting, they could finally walk forward on their own terms, carrying memories that would never entirely fade. Today, this chapter of the war is rarely acknowledged beyond a few lines in specialist archives. Museums display uniforms and weapons worn by male prisoners, while history books tallied divisions and armies, yet the women who endured captivity remain largely invisible. They occupied a space between definitions: soldiers who were not treated as soldiers and civilians who were not allowed to be civilians. Their experience does not fit neatly into heroic narratives or simple moral frameworks, which may be why it is so often overlooked. Yet their quiet endurance carries its own weight, reminding us that war does not only destroy cities and armies, it reshapes ordinary lives in lasting ways. Remembering them broadens our understanding of conflict beyond the battlefield alone. History is not written only by generals, maps, and marching armies. It is also shaped by the forgotten, by people who lived between categories and were carried along by events they never controlled. The women in this story remind us that even when the guns fall silent, the human cost of war continues to unfold. If you want to help rescue stories like this from being lost, take a moment to like this video. If you want to join a community that values overlooked history, consider subscribing, and share in the comments where you are watching from and whether your own family has a story worth remembering, because history truly lives when we tell it.